Hi, this is Tom Salemi of Device Talks. Welcome to the IntuitiveTalks Podcast. Surgical robotics presents an enormous opportunity for companies. There are surgeon shortages, sporadic healthcare, and miraculous technological advancement in both robotics and communications. So to understand where this sector is headed, we invited senior executives from Intuitive to share their company's impressive story. Change is coming. Consider these upcoming episodes to be guideposts for the future to follow. Well, thanks for joining us on this first episode of the Intuitive Talks Podcast. Again, this is Tom Salemi. I am editorial director of Device Talks. Device Talks is the sponsor and organizer of many meetings, both virtual and in person. And of course, many podcasts, including this here podcast, Intuitive Talks. You can find our library of podcasts at devicetalks.com. In Intuitive Talks, we're going to talk to senior leaders at Intuitive Surgical, and we're starting right at the top. I interviewed Gary Guthart, the CEO of Intuitive. He stepped right up to the plate, became our first guest on the Intuitive Talks podcast, and it was a great conversation with Gary. I never had the chance to speak with him before. Talked about those early days at Intuitive, why he moved over from SRI to join the Intuitive Surgical project and how he eventually became CEO. We talked about how Intuitive Surgical made its case to payers and providers about why its Da Vinci robotic system benefited not only them, but patients. So it's an important lesson that robotic surgery companies will need to learn going forward. We also talked a bit at the end about the growing demand and the growing competition in the surgical robotics field. And Gary shares his views on that. So once again, going forward, we'll release one podcast episode a month toward the end of the month. And Intuitive is making their executives available for interviews. But these podcasts would not be possible without sponsorship from our Device Talks partners. So before we begin our first episode of the Intuitive Talks podcast, I'd like to bring in our first sponsor, Tegra Medical. I had the chance to speak with Mike Trelevin. Mike is the Senior Vice President of Engineering at Tegra Medical. Mike, tell us about Tegra Medical.
Tegra Medical is, as our tagline says, where medical devices come to life. We contract manufacture complex components and devices exclusively for the medical device industry. We have a large range of manufacturing technologies like laser processing, precision machining, and injection molding. And we make single-use and reusable devices, many of which are for minimally invasive surgeries in areas such as cardiovascular, orthopedic, spine, drug delivery, and many others. Tegra Medical was created by combining companies that were experts with certain manufacturing technologies. It was all part of a strategy to create a single contract manufacturing organization with the synergies to offer true end-to-end contract manufacturing.
We'll hear more from Mike Trelevin of Tegra Medical a little later in the podcast. If you want more information on Tegra Medical, go to Tegra. Tegra is spelled Tegra, medical.com. Gary Guthart, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Tom. Pleasure to be here.
It's going to be a great series. Really happy to be focusing on Intuitive, and we're going to be looking at a lot of different aspects, both technical and clinical. But we really kind of want to kick off the series with a conversation about how everything came together, kind of to set the tone. And I always enjoy these origin stories, so to speak. So I was hoping you could take us back to the beginning. I listened to an interview you did with Device Talks a few years ago at one of our conferences. I believe there was a basketball game sort of was a key event to the creation of Intuitive Surgical. Can you take us back into the early 90s?
Sure. Yeah, I'll clean up the basketball game story a little bit. I got introduced to the technology at a place called Stanford Research Institute. It's Northern California. You use things from Stanford Research Institute, SRI, all the time. SRI is credited for inventing the computer mouse. the voice recognition technology that's in Siri was invented there. And a team was working on, one of a few teams in the world, working on robotic-assisted surgery early on. They predated me. I joined SRI coming out of graduate school as a postdoc in 1992. There was a group for robotic-assisted surgery that had been originally funded by some SRI funds and NIH, later funded by DARPA. Mm-hmm. And that group was in process. It was started by a gentleman named Phil Green and later led by others. And that basketball story, I was working there in 1992, 93. I ran into the head of that lab playing basketball, and we got to know each other on the sidelines. And he was looking for help in a certain kind of algorithms and mathematics that I was trained in. Only in Silicon Valley do you have that conversation on the sidelines of a basketball court. And he invited me to come over and look at the kind of work they were doing. And it was the early prototypes for the kinds of technology that you see in our products today.
Now, what was driving that early effort? Was this a military initiative first to sort of develop a battlefield robot, or who came along and said we need to find a way to assist surgeons with robots?
Yeah, it's kind of an often repeated myth that the first application or first thought was a military application.
Oh, okay. I'm glad I asked.
The first thoughts were for precision surgery. The folks at SRI, they predate me. And by the way, I'm not a founder at Intuitive either, just to be clear.
Sure.
Their original thoughts early on were that they could advance manual laparoscopy and other precision surgery applications using this kind of technology. They also thought there were remote surgery applications as might be applied in battlefield environments. So there is a story with DARPA and the lead at DARPA, Dr. Rick Satava, that does intersect with SRI early on. But it wasn't that was the first thought. Both those thoughts were present in that early group over time. They had some funding from different sources, including SRI, including NIH, and ultimately the largest funding came from Dr. Satava and DARPA.
So what was that moment that you experienced the technology and you saw this could be something?
So they were working on getting what amounts to the control systems right, making the system that they were developing, this robot assist system, intuitive, making it feel right. Mm-hmm. And they had invited me to come over and see it. I had not seen it before. And they gave me a little task. The project lead, a gentleman named Ajit Shah, Ajit said, "Here, try this." And he handed me a set of loops and he asked me to do some suturing by hand, kind of under magnification. And I'm not bad with my hands. I had some prior experience in kind of microassembly and other things. And but I never had any medical exposure. That was my first exposure, was to suture back together a femoral artery on a rat in a lab. And so I tried that manually and I made a little progress, but it was really hard. And then he sat me down on their prototype, first time I had seen it, which had a console and the surgical environment with robotic manipulators for the surgeon, and then action at the patient. And I did the same activity with zoomed, scaled up vision and with robotic assistance. And it was just immediately obvious to me. I stood up at that moment and went, wow, this is unbelievably easier and really cool. So it was one of those things where a demo was worth more than 1,000 words. And after that, I went back to my boss. I was involved in a different program, and I asked if he would support my transfer to that program, and he did. And from there on, I was all in. So it was a lightning strike moment for me, and some serendipity that I had run into Ajit and that he had invited me to come join that effort.
That's fantastic. Oh, those moments are wondrous. So you mentioned you weren't a founder of Intuitive. It was founded in 95. You though joined in 96. So you certainly came in the early side of things. How did you make that transition? How did you decide to join a company?
Yeah, I was younger at that time. I was enjoying SRI, and I met the founders. At the time, there were three folks who had founded that company, Intuitive. One medical founder, one, a technologist, and then a person from the venture capital side. And I got to know the technologist founder. His name is Rob Young, and he had invited me to come join the company. And it took me a while to say yes. My initial instinct was it was going well at SRI. I enjoyed the work. I wasn't quite sure what the business startup might look like. And ultimately, after some back and forth, the person on the venture capital side took me out to coffee. We sat down and we talked, and he convinced me that the experience would be worth it, regardless of where I headed in my career. That's a gentleman named John Freund. And so John asked me to come, and I ultimately said yes. I came in as a control system engineer or algorithms person, and I joined as the 11th person in the company and the 10th technical person, the 10th engineer, which was delightful. I'm glad I said yes.
So how did the CEO position become available to you? How did that happen? And then we can start talking about the company, but I'm kind of interested in following your path a bit. Yeah.
So I started off on the technical side. After a couple of years, we were working hard and growing. And I was asked to lead the algorithms group initially, and then the software group. I did not aspire to be a CEO. That wasn't something that was in my plan. Mm-hmm. But our first outside CEO, Lonnie Smith, came in. I got to know him in 1997. And over the years, he was a fantastic mentor. He had given me additional responsibilities in management. At some point, asked me to be head of operations and then president and COO. So I went through that process in 2010 as part of a planned transition with Lonnie. He stepped up to just be chairman of the board. He had been chairman and CEO and invited me to be CEO. So I became CEO in 2010 and have been so since.
Amazing. And how was that transition for you? How different is it as a job? I mean, it must be wildly different. And how did you sort of come to manage those differences and become the CEO of a large, significant company?
One of the things that I learned early on was, especially in this space, surgical robots and the kind of technologies that we develop, it's not a one-person show ever. Mm-hmm. They're complex technologies. You need really great people in all sorts of different places in the organization, from engineers to training people to software to your business systems and everything else. And early on, I learned surround yourself with people who are better than you, who are just outstanding in order to get the job done. And we were lucky. Our early staff were very, very capable and extremely collaborative. And that was kind of drilled into me early on. As I took on other leadership roles, for example, head of operations, I was not a manufacturing person by training. I had come out of this applied research background. And so my first instincts were to go find people who are just world-class, outstanding people, and invite them to join. Mm-hmm. Common story, and we did that. And CEO is no different, whether it's chief medical officer or our folks who run our business systems or our commercial organizations. It's really been find people who are just outstanding in the field and create an environment in which we can succeed together. So in that sense, it was a continuation. The issues are a little bit different in the role that I play. I think our job here, or a job at the CEO position, is make sure we have a strategy that delivers customer value for the long term, that make sure we have an organization that is capable, deeply competent, and well led, and then make sure that the economics work for the company, that mm-hmm. that it can self-sustain. And so that's kind of the transition.
Understanding that you weren't CEO at the time from the late 90s into the 2000s, I'm hoping, though, you can still sort of paint a picture for us of those early days when it wasn't, maybe you can characterize the reception that intuitive and robotic surgery received from the healthcare community. But from my perspective, it was never 100% certain that hospitals wanted it, that surgeons wanted it, that they felt they needed it. Do you agree with that sort of assessment? And how did Intuitive sort of go about building support and helping people to see the benefits of the surgery? We're going to take a quick break from this conversation to bring back our sponsor, Tegra Medical. I'm here again with Mike Trelevin, Senior Vice President of Engineering at Tegra Medical. Mike, you mentioned end-to-end solutions. Tell me more about what makes Tegra Medical's end-to-end solutions different than other companies.
Well, many contract manufacturers claim to offer end-to-end solutions, but in reality, their expertise is focused in one area like plastics or simply assembly and packaging. When they say end-to-end, what they really mean is they offer supply chain management. And we like to differentiate ourselves because what we offer is far from just supply chain management. Tegra Medical is vertically integrated, allowing us to do the metal and plastics. We support our customers beginning with our Genesis Tech Center product development services and extending all the way through manufacturing, finished devices, packaging, and sterilization management. This is really helpful in today's environment where regulatory processes are so stringent. It allows us to be under a single quality management system for an entire project.
Mike, tell me, what are some of the deciding factors that go into an OEM's decision to choose Tegra Medical to make their device?
We're known for not only creating sharp devices, but, and this is more difficult, keeping them sharp. We're able to manufacture the metal business end of a device and then keep it sharp all the way through the entire manufacturing process, including insert molding, which often causes issues with other manufacturers. No surgeon wants to find out an instrument isn't sharp enough while in the operating room. The other thing our customers really appreciate is that we're willing to manufacture the devices others find too difficult to make. For example, creating devices and implants with anatomical bends is very precise work. We've developed a proprietary process for creating the anatomical bends in intermedullary nails without compromising the implant's holes and slots. We've often taken on work that other manufacturers walked away from because it was too difficult and or too hard to do efficiently.
And let's talk a moment about robotics, Mike. Is Tegra Medical involved in surgical robotics?
Yes, we're deep into creating components for the navigation system used in robotic surgeries. As you can imagine, these devices must be extremely precise. The tolerance on the parts is virtually zero. So it takes careful engineering during product development and great operator skill during manufacturing. Our years of experience making implants has positioned us well for challenges like this, and we look forward to tackling more of them.
All right, well, that's great. Thanks, Mike Trelevin, for joining us on the Intuitive Talks podcast. Thanks to Tegra Medical for stepping up to sponsor this first episode of the podcast. Once again, if you want more information, go to tegramedical.com. Now let's get back into our conversation with Gary Guthart. Maybe you can characterize the reception that intuitive and robotic surgery received from the healthcare community. But from my perspective, it was never 100% certain that hospitals wanted it, that surgeons wanted it, that they felt they needed it. Do you agree with that sort of assessment? And how did Intuitive sort of go about building support and helping people to see the benefits of the surgery?
You know, I'd say that for sure when we entered, there was both excitement in some quarters of the healthcare community and deep skepticism in some quarters. And even now, after a fairly long history and a lot of data and evidence, there's still some skepticism. Mm-hmm. So not a surprise. I guess I characterize the folks who were enthusiastic as those who looked at minimally invasive surgery as a really good thing and look to expand it into areas where it had struggled to gain traction. Clearly, robotic assisted surgery of the type we practiced in the early days is a child of the MIS, minimally invasive surgery movement. Mm-hmm. And so there are some folks who were saying, a good example is in prostatectomy. Prostatectomy had some very strong minimally invasive surgeons who could perform it in a minimally invasive fashion, but it had not penetrated deeply. Laparoscopy had not penetrated deeply into the urologic profession because it's hard. There's a lot of reconstruction required. And so there were some in that space in urology that looked at this and said, hey, this is a tool that can deliver strong outcomes in minimally invasive surgery and perhaps extend it beyond the small group of surgeons who can do it laparoscopically. Some of those surgeons are lap trained and were good. Some lap trained surgeons who were at the top of their game looked at it and said, I don't need it. Mm-hmm. That may be true for them. That may be an absolutely true point even today. But then they said something else, which is, I don't need it and nobody else does. and that's the area that we disagreed with, and hence some of the conflict in those early days.
So did you see, or was it presented that Intuitive and Da Vinci was going to, I guess, democratize, for lack of a better word, but to help those to help those surgeons who maybe did need it to bring their level of expertise up to those who said they didn't need it. Was that the general thesis of what you were trying to do?
We did think that that had the opportunity to expand minimally invasive surgery both to surgeons who otherwise were not satisfied with manual laparoscopy, and then extend it to patients who were otherwise being offered open surgical solutions where an MIS solution was possible. And we did see it at that time. That looked like an opportunity we had explored early on in cardiac surgery and then later in urology. And that came to pass. And early on, our medical founders and our technical founders had seen that as an opportunity, as a vision for bringing MIS to a broader number of folks, high quality MIS.
What measures or steps did you take to build that support, to convert surgeons, to win over hospital systems? Was it a numbers play? Were you showing them data? Did you have some other efforts that helped you spread the word and show them the potential benefits?
Early on, first we reached out and partnered with surgeons who shared that vision, who shared that mission. And one of the early champions was Dr. Manny Menon at Henry Ford Hospital in prostatectomy in urology, and he was quite careful and rigorous in his data assessment and his data analysis. And he really took a lot of the first data sets as it comes to prostatectomy and published them. And he received a fair amount of criticism and skepticism. And we found other organizations, in this case, City of Hope down in Southern California, they were strong laparoscopic urologists, and they looked to replicate his results to see if they could find like value. And I think they entered it skeptical that they would, but wanting to do the science. And they did the science. They did replicate his efforts and his studies. And to their credit, they published it and said, we were surprised. There's more value here than we had expected to find. And they were able to support Dr. Menon's results. And that started to shift the conversation around, hey, can this really advance the number of folks who are getting MIS? It was an exciting time for us.
Sure. No, I bet. How about on the payer side? I mean, one of the ways that the robotic surgery was described, or at least it had been said that systems were purchased and never used, is maybe apocryphal. It may just be urban legend, but things, systems sitting in the hallway, not necessarily just Da Vinci, but just in general, that the robotic surgical systems were really more of a publicity play for a hospital than an effective tool. Did you encounter that, and how did you sort of battle against those stories?
Yeah, so because there's a couple of things. I think you've asked two questions in one, and let me just tease them apart.
I did, thank you.
let me just tease them apart a little bit, if I may.
Please do.
The first one of how do we think about cost, and is this one of the criticisms early had been cost more, takes longer, right? That was kind of the criticism. And on the cost side, again, there's just a huge amount of myth out there and some, I think, lack of care in thinking about how cost works. So the cost that matters in the end, for example, you mentioned the payers, is the total cost to treat per patient episode. It isn't the cost of the scalpel, whether it's a robotic scalpel or a handheld scalpel, that is the dominant cost in the total cost to treat a patient who has a disease, who's trying to get surgery to help ameliorate that disease. So you have to look at all of it, right? The material costs, the costs of complications, the cost of being in the hospital, and so on. So that's the core economic engine. And over the years, we and hospitals have gotten a lot better at being able to measure those costs, and it has to be done carefully. Sometimes folks stick on capital cost. So cost of a system, that's the capital cost. There's cost to service that system, and then there's the cost of the kinds of things you use in surgery, the materials to get the work done. Those costs are a little bit easier to assess, but again, they have to be done carefully. People can get stuck on the capital cost, but remember that capital lasts for years and years and does a lot of different surgeries. So you need to amortize its cost over procedures. When you do that carefully, the costs come out to be either very, very close to open and lap surgery, sometimes better. If you don't use your system, so your comment about where these parked in hallways, in some rare instances, people would buy it and then a surgeon would move on and other surgeons would not be interested and they would be underutilized. And in that case, the most expensive thing you can do is buy a robot and not use it. That is not a good use of funds. It's not good for the hospital. It's not good for us. And if we see those things happening, certainly on my watch as CEO, if we saw that happening, we would step in and help the hospital move that system, sell it to another person who wanted to use it. Having idle capital isn't good for them and it isn't good for us. So we would take care of that. With regard to the final point you made of, hey, wasn't this really just more about marketing than outcomes? There were people who assessed that criticism early on. Certainly, there are people that are excited about new technologies, and it's certainly true that hospitals compete with each other for the patients in their community. So those things go on. One of the ways to test is that really what's happening, and one of the things that I looked at to test whether that's happening is, does a hospital buy a robot, buy just one, advertise it, and then rarely use it? That would be just a marketing play. That would just be their idea of, I have it now, I can get people in the door. That very rarely happens. And in fact, the counter to that often happens, which is certainly in the last several years, our biggest customers are getting to be bigger customers of ours. Many hospitals in the U.S. have multiple systems that are utilized heavily, and then they buy additional ones. So this idea that, okay, I just need it for advertising purposes has been debunked by the actuality that very large institutions who are quite capable, major centers around the U.S., who are very sophisticated in terms of how they do their analysis of outcomes, have continued to reinvest and double down with our products. And that's because they use them.
Thank you for dissecting my shotgun question. I'll try to be more precise with the next one. Did Obamacare and all the attention being paid to cost containment, did that have a positive or negative impact on your telling and selling this story?
I think in the end, when we look back on it, it has been a positive for us. I think broad coverage for the population is an important and great thing.
Sure.
And when that happens, I think people look around and say, okay, what are we trying to achieve? What's the hospital trying to achieve? And in the end, I don't think hospitals really care about robots. I don't think they give much of a thought about the technology itself. I think what they care a lot about is, can they drive, this is their words, not ours, the quadruple aim for their surgical programs? Can they get great outcomes? Can they get a great patient experience? Can they get a good or a strong care team experience for the surgeons, anesthesiologists, nurses? And can they manage the total cost to treat per patient episode? So can they lower total cost while getting quality right? And we've shown that with our programs, the robots and the ecosystem that surrounds them, we can deliver quadruple aim value for hospitals. And with the increase in analytic powers, we can show that more clearly, more quickly. I think Obamacare, with this idea of both access and quality and total cost to treat, those are aligned concepts, and that has worked well for us.
Shifting gears a bit, I do want to talk about the future. It's obviously the robotic surgery space is drawing more and more attention, and we can talk about that. But I just wanted to drill into Intuitive's culture a bit. It just kind of got me thinking. You're based in Silicon Valley. Do people in the building, do they see Intuitive as a medical device company or as a technology company operating in the medical field, is there really no difference, and I'm trying to parse things a little too intensely?
Oh, I think it's a good question. I think we see ourselves at the intersection of medical device and clearly healthcare and technology. Mm-hmm. If you walk through the buildings here, I'm sitting here in Sunnyvale, California, which is in the heart of Silicon Valley. I actually grew up here. I think if you ask people, are you a tech company? Nobody would say yes to that. Mm-hmm. If you said, are you a med device company? I think they'd say yes, and. And yes, and clearly we're rooted in healthcare. We have been from the beginning. Product life cycles and the regulatory environment in healthcare are different than in tech, pure tech. So we view ourselves as sitting in that intersection. We scour the earth for great people who are interested in healthcare, and then great technologies that can help create a technology-enabled ecosystem for our customers. So we really are the blend of those two, and have been since day one.
And does that experience give you a unique perspective on companies like Amazon and Google that famously try to make impact in healthcare and efforts, and I'm not being snide or cute about it, but have difficulty and realize it's a difficult industry to sort of change, at least maybe at the pace that they want to change things. Do you sort of have a unique perspective on what they're experiencing when they try to enter this industry?
Perhaps a shared perspective. And these are incredible companies with incredible capabilities. I think what all of us find, they and us, is that healthcare is complex along multiple dimensions. And so it's not that a technology solution is a silver bullet to solve all these problems. And then given all the stakeholders in healthcare, the pace of change and implementation can be much longer timelines than non-healthcare environments are. I think that's for folks who have come from outside healthcare. When they come in, managing all the multiple stakeholders, understanding where the regulatory boundaries and needs are, and doing well in that space is perhaps more complex than people see on initial blink. And if I may, I'll just give you a simple example as to what that complexity might look like. So fair enough. May I jump there?
Yes, please. Go right ahead.
Yeah. If you ask the question, how many human beings have to do the right thing the day of surgery, from the time somebody comes into the hospital or surgery center and gets checked in, make sure that the background is right and all the consents are right and the medications are right, and goes through the OR, has the procedure, has discharged, is checked out and sent home. It's good to ask the question, how many people have to do the right thing for that to be a good result? Because often we think about surgery as just occurring in the operating room. And for the folks who've studied that, and some of the work we do too, the number is somewhere between 60 and 70 different people have to do the right thing the day of surgery. That's just the day of surgery for this all to go right. So you get a sense of the level of complexity. And so if you come in and you say, well, I have an app for that, that's great. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to develop an app. I'm not insulting anybody. I think it's a great idea, but it's just a complex thing. This isn't Angry Birds. It's something else.
Great point. So looking at your past 10 years as CEO and Intuitive's 20 plus years in the business, you've largely been the robotic surgery industry. You're the dominant player there, at least in soft tissue. Stryker's obviously doing orthopedic. How do you feel about the adoption of robotic technology? Has it happened as quickly as you had hoped it would? I mean, you're obviously would like it to be, always wanted to be faster, but has there been more resistance to it? Have people been more receptive to it? What have the last 10 years what feeling do those leave you with? It's
a great question. I'm not sure it could go faster. There are some places, there are pockets in different places where I think we could have done better, or the world might have seen the value more quickly than we did. There are certainly some places where we could have learned and improved. In other places, I think it adopted relatively quickly relative to not so much what happens in the technology space, as we said before, but really what's happened traditionally in medicine. There's still pockets of skepticism. I guess what I would say is I feel like at times, the most frustrating part is the lack of a consistent methodology for folks to assess value. That I think is the rate limiting step right now. We're getting better. The proliferation of electronic medical records, I think the embracing of analytics within health institutions, looking at their own data, has been a catalyst, and something super exciting. I'm really happy about that. One of the things that's been tough in surgery, you probably know, is reading a small randomized control trial that somebody has written in an academic institution rarely changes practice. And it's because it tends to be not very predictive of what's happening in the outside world. What's happened today with electronic medical records, registries, and on-site real-world evidence is that folks can look at their own results in their own environment and assess for themselves. That has, I think, change the pace of adoption and increase the confidence of healthcare leaders in provider institutions to make good decisions. And we feel like we can help that. It's been great. So that I think has been one of the positive updates. You talked a little bit about the field more broadly and other institutions, other companies that are doing things. We can talk about that too, if you like.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's where I was going next. I know we're obviously seeing Medtronic and J&J and others having developing programs, and I know that in the past there have been other companies that have developed systems that I'm not even sure if they're around anymore. But this has a feel of these are two of the larger companies in the space, and there are others that I'm not mentioning. It feels like the competition is a little more direct. How do you look at these companies coming in, and how does Intuitive hold on to what it's got and build market share?
Yeah. So first, just looking historically, there have been to date commercialized, give or take 25 companies somewhere in the world that have done surgical robots in the neighborhood. As I said before, I think we live in this world of surgery as a field, MIS as a subfield, and then robotic assistance. Of those 25 historically that have been in the market, about 5 are have made it to about 1,000 systems somewhere in the world. The experience we've had is that the prototypes aren't so hard to make. The first 100 shipments are harder still, get all the way through your regulatory clearances. But getting to 1,000 is a little bit tougher because you're going to have demonstrated value. Today, there are probably 100 computer-assisted surgery companies that are at least in the neighborhood of the kinds of things we're interested in. So I think the world has really recognized the value of this approach. I think that's positive for us. I'd be shocked if otherwise. We'd be in the wrong neighborhood doing the wrong thing. I think the larger companies have realized that value too, starting several years ago. And I think it's inevitable that they bring products to market, and customers will have a choice. From our point of view, I think the forward opportunity for improvement is huge. I'm really not worried that Intuitive will run out of things to do or value to bring, or that this somehow becomes a really small market share fight between a few players. I think that looking out, the opportunity for better outcomes in acute intervention, which is kind of how we think about it. Somebody comes in and is looking to resolve disease. We want to bring a technology-enabled ecosystem to help our customers provide that quad aim resolution. I think that opportunity is just huge. So I think customers will evaluate other options. We try hard to be the first choice by understanding their needs best. But I think the market also has a huge opportunity to just grow overall.
Do you anticipate that it would be difficult for a hospital to convert systems if they have an Intuitive system or 2 or 3 and they're accustomed to it? I imagine there's just a built-in resistance to bringing in some new tech with new screens and new handles. Is that provide some sort of protective qualities for Intuitive?
Yeah, I'd start with the following. I think first, I don't think most customers view it as robot versus robot. Some will. Some people will be excited about some of the technical differences. All those technical differences come with trade-offs. But I think leadership at hospitals are looking for programs that can create great value for them over time. In that sense, it's the whole ecosystem. It's really the ecosystem versus the ecosystem that most hospital administration will be evaluating. If somebody comes out with a new concept that can change the value of that ecosystem in terms of outcomes, in terms of total cost to treat, then I think they have an opportunity to switch. If it's just a little bit different and it doesn't improve on those outcomes, or it's inferior in those outcomes, then I think folks will stay where they are, because retraining everybody and introducing new systems in is a costly and long endeavor. Mm-hmm. Having said that, I do think hospitals will be interested in evaluating alternatives. We offer more than one thing, from different versions of our multi-port systems to single port systems and so on. And we know they like to evaluate those. So I think they'll evaluate them. But in the end, they'll be evaluating the total value of the ecosystem. And what I mean by ecosystem is the systems, the instruments that snap onto it, the software and analytics that go with it, our training capabilities for them, our analytic capabilities, and our customer support capabilities. All of those things together are the thing that help them deliver their program.
final question, I think. Sometimes I find another one, but I think this will be the last one. Where will your innovation, will the source or the origins of your innovation, your new tools, will that change in coming years? Do you see yourselves acquiring more? You've created Intuitive Ventures, so you've got a venture program now. How do you see innovation changing for Intuitive in the coming years?
Yeah, over the past several years, we value both organic innovation. We attract, hire, retain, and develop a fantastic technical staff. We also look for people who have done great things. We are not a not invented here shop. If folks are doing things that we think can accelerate great outcomes or the depth of our offering, we'll either partner them and sometimes acquire them. We probably acquire 4 to 6 teams and technologies annually. We try to lean in and find those things when we can build them deeply into the company, and rather than waiting until they're very big later. We do scour the earth, both for early things, and if there's a bigger program and we think it makes sense to bring it in, we're certainly open to doing that. Intuitive Ventures is such an idea, which is to give us an opportunity to interact with entrepreneurs in the space, particularly in places where we think that they can create new value, whether it's new digital or AI opportunities or new architectures that may help acute care. And so it's been so far really, really well received.
Fantastic. Well, that is indeed my final question. Gary, I appreciate your taking the time and thank you for joining us on the podcast.
All right. Thank you. Good to talk to you.
You too. All right. Well, that is a wrap. Thanks again for joining us on this maiden voyage of the Intuitive Talks podcast. Great to have the captain of the ship, Gary Guthart, CEO, on the podcast as our first guest. But stay tuned. We have many, many more coming. You don't want to miss one. So you'll need to subscribe to our Device Talks podcast channel. You can subscribe to the Device Talks weekly podcast or this podcast, and future episodes will be sent directly to your phone or your computer or wherever you listen to your podcast. So please do subscribe. Please do like. Please do follow. Please do reach out to me. I am on social media. I'm on Twitter @MedTechTom. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Tom Salemi, Salemi. Once again, we're working on many, many great things for the device community, for the Device Talks community. Go to devicetalks.com to learn about our in-person meetings, our virtual meetings, and our many, many podcasts. Don't forget to tune in next time. We'll have another great episode of the Intuitive Talks podcast waiting for you.